Alright folks, this is Harris Sultan, and today's video is a little different from my usual content. And I think a sizable chunk of my audience probably wouldn't agree with me on this, which is why I want you to listen to the video until the end, as I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. So you probably know by now that I'm a strong advocate for Western hegemony. I don't make any excuses, I don't apologize for it. I believe in the Western world order, and I think everyone, yes, everyone should be grateful that we live in a world shaped by Western values. The only reason we have human rights, the Geneva Conventions, democracy, secularism, and even tolerance for multiculturalism, science and technology is because of the Western world order. This isn't a dig at other great civilizations like China, India, Japan, or the Middle East, but let's be real, these advancements that I just mentioned have largely come from the West. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. But if the Western world order didn't exist, we'd still be living under monarchies where the king's word was law, dictators ruled with iron fists, or theocracies stuck centuries in the past where women were second-class citizens, scientific ignorance was the norm, and surviving childhood was a miracle, barbaric punishments was the norm. And no, this isn't an exaggeration or hyperbole. The world was like this until an accident happened around the 14th century when some people thought, maybe we should learn from the past. Thus, the rebirth of classical knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome began. This period is called the Renaissance. Sure, the Middle East was ahead of Europe at that time, but they hit a wall. The so-called golden age of Islam from the 10th to the 12th centuries was long gone. The scientific revolution that could have happened in the Muslim world fell flat. Europeans picked up from where the Muslims had left off, drawing on their advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. This transfer of knowledge, along with Europe's rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman texts, fueled the Renaissance and later scientific progress. Europe shifted its focus from the superstition and backwardness of the Middle Ages to rediscovering the arts and classical knowledge of Greek and Roman civilizations. This rebirth led to what we now call the Reformation period. Europe was no longer blindly following the church. People became more educated about their past, and they started challenging the status quo. By the 17th century, the Middle Ages were a distant memory. Europe was ahead of the rest of the world, including the Muslim world. Then came the 18th century, the industrial age, riding on the back of the scientific revolution that had started in the 16th century. This paved the way for the modern world of the 19th century and beyond. Were Europeans of the 19th and 20th centuries perfect? No. In fact, their body count would put Genghis Khan and Tamerlane to shame, but they learned from their mistakes. After World War II, Western leaders decided to build a better world where dictators would feel embarrassed to be labeled as such. That's why even Kim Jong-un calls himself a democratic leader. Did you know the full name of North Korea? DPRK, and that D actually stands for democracy? Yes, DPRK means Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So in conclusion, the Western world order is good for all of us. And that's why I said at the start of the video that everyone should be grateful that we live in a world dominated by Western values. However, that's not where the story ends. There are forces at play that want to undo all the good things that we as humans have achieved, primarily through the Western world order. Putin is at the forefront of this, backed by the largest nuclear stockpile. Yes, even bigger than those of the good guys, the US, the UK, and France combined. What fascinates me is that one of the greatest things the West gave to its people, that is free speech, is also becoming one of the biggest hurdles in maintaining our international rules-based order. We now have influencers doing the bidding of a despot who doesn't respect this order. One of the core rules in the international rules-based order is that larger countries do not invade or annex their neighbors' territories. But Putin is not a democratically elected leader. He's a tyrant who dreams of being remembered in history as one of the great czars of Russia. Therefore, he wants to conquer more territory. The great czars lived in a pre-Western world order where the world was brutal and annexing territories was the norm. This is why the West needs Ukraine to stand its ground against its much more powerful foe, who did not stop at Georgia and certainly won't stop at Ukraine. Ukraine is not perfect. It was corrupt, But Ukraine is only 33 years old. You can't expect Ukraine to have institutions as strong as those of Western democracies like the US or the UK, which have been around for centuries. And before you say that the current Ukrainian state is anti-Russia and pro-West because the CIA orchestrated what is now called the Revolution of Dignity, let me say this. If the US caused this revolution, which isn't entirely true, then it's a good thing. We need more pro-West revolutions around the world because with Western values comes secularism, liberalism, democracy, and by extension, human rights and free speech. Viktor Yanukovych was Putin's puppet, and when he severed ties with the democratic European Union and the West, the Ukrainians themselves stood up against him. Sure, they got our support. Any country that yearns for democracy and independence from mad, tyrannical neighbors like Putin should get our support. Have you ever wondered why almost all of the former Soviet satellite states joined NATO and the West? They could have easily gone back to the Russian camp, but they didn't, because they know that once you join the West, prosperity and freedom follow. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia jumped into the Western camp as soon as they got the chance. It's the same with Ukraine as well. And trust me, it will be the same with Belarus once its dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, falls. And he will fall once Putin is gone. You've seen Russia cry constantly about NATO expanding its territory. Well, sorry, you shouldn't have treated your neighbors so poorly that they join the West at the first opportunity they get. I don't see Canada, France, or the UK rebelling against the American-led order and jumping into Russia's camp. It's because life in the West is good. Now I want to address those Americans who ask, why should we support Ukraine when we have so many homeless people here? This notion has been popularized by Trump and is very common among Republicans. Well, first of all, should you then stop supporting Israel as well? Do your homeless people or other domestic problems disappear when you extend support to Israel? By the way, I want America and the West to support Israel, and following the same logic, to support Ukraine as well. I don't support Israel for religious reasons or because God promised this land to them. I support Israel because it's the only democracy in the Middle East. It follows Western values and is fighting against enemies who want to destroy the West at the first opportunity they get. And this is also why I support Ukraine, because Putin is antithetical to the West. I support Trump because of his firm stance against Islamism and Islamic jihad, but I don't agree with his position on Ukraine. In his last debate with Kamala Harris, he failed to recognize that a Ukrainian victory is in America's best interest.
Very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers.
Regardless of whether it's the Democrats or Republicans in power, America must support a fellow democracy like Ukraine, just like we'll support Taiwan. Trump's claim that he will end the war before even assuming office is reckless. I genuinely hope that this is just campaign rhetoric and that once he becomes president, US support for Ukraine will continue. If not, it could signal the beginning of the end of the American-led Western world order. America needs to support Ukraine because if Ukraine falls, it would be a massive blow to the international rules-based order. America's prosperity is tied to European prosperity. When Republicans and Trump loosely threaten to pull out of NATO, they endanger the security of the entire European continent. The EU is America's largest trading partner. Their trade is worth about 1.3 trillion US dollars. Do you think American trade with Europe will continue as normal if Europe falls into war with a tyrant who wants to annex Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, or even Poland? It won't. And then your homeless population and other domestic problems will increase tenfold. That's why giving $60 billion to Ukraine for a couple of years is minuscule compared to the price Americans and ordinary Westerners will have to pay if Ukraine falls. By the way, all these billions of dollars go back into the US economy. It creates American jobs. The money stays in America, and in return, America maintains its world order, which is the world order we all want to live in. Russia has been the sick man of Europe for the last 200 years. It has never adopted democracy or modernity. It has always been ruled by despots and tyrants and is likely to continue down this path. Due to its large nuclear stockpile, we could never go to war with Russia directly, but Ukraine is already at war with Russia. We don't have to sacrifice our Western soldiers to defeat Russia. Brave Ukrainians are sacrificing their young men just as the Israelis are fighting against our common enemies. We need to give more support to Ukraine, not less. If we could defeat Russia, our eternal enemy, who buys our influences and disrupts our electoral process, our world would be more secure. Yes, I know most of you don't believe it, but just look at social media. You'll find many pro-Russia voices in the West. Why is that? Why would any Westerner who lives in a democracy and cherishes free speech sing praises for Putin, a dictator who throws his enemies from high windows or poisons them with radioactive tea? Why would any Westerner support a guy like that? If you support him, then you've fallen for Russian propaganda. So yes, Putin does take advantage of our free speech and free media. And at home, he bans YouTube. Free speech is a hard pill to swallow for governments, not just because nobody likes criticism, but also because it opens your society up to idiotic narratives, like being pro-Putin and anti-Zelensky. Zelensky could have fled like Afghan President Ashraf Ghani did. When the West told him to flee because they were confident that Kyiv will fall and Putin's assassins were on their way, instead of fleeing, he said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." Ask yourself, if you were in his shoes, what would you have done? A 70-mile column of Russian tanks and armored vehicles is coming towards your capital, and they will butcher you in ways you can't even imagine. What would you have done? You would have either fled or stayed. And if you stayed, of course, you would ask the West for help. Is there corruption in Ukraine? Sure, there is. I mean, most Americans and Western Europeans believe their governments are corrupt too. So why not extend the same concession to Ukraine? There is so much more to say on this topic, but I'll stop here. And maybe I'll talk about it in my future videos. Just remember this. Our prosperity is tied to European security, and Ukrainians are fighting to ensure Europe remains secure. We'll likely face a massive recession if war extends beyond Ukraine into the rest of Europe, which becomes more probable if we abandon Ukraine. I know some of my audience probably doesn't support the narrative of backing Ukraine, but I'm sorry, you're wrong in this. Islamism, Xi Jinping, and Putin are the three biggest and baddest threats to the West. Ignoring any one of them would be a grave mistake. I hope you liked the video, and if you didn't, I hope you'll think about it and maybe leave a comment below. I might learn a thing or two and recalibrate my position accordingly. You can support this channel by becoming a patron at patreon.com/HarrisSultan, or you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HarrisSultan. If not, that's okay. Until next time, ta-da. If you'd like to support my work, you can become my patron by going to patreon.com/HarrisSultan, or you can simply buy me a coffee.